Maki Zenin has evolved as a person and as a sorcerer once more within the series, and with her new boost in power and abilities, I decided that one of the best ways to put her strength to the test is to pit her up against the Disaster Cursed Spirits. A group of cursed spirits that, up to this point, have acted as one of the highest tiers of strength that a curse can achieve. Seeing as how Maki has grown exponentially since her last encounter with these curses, this begged the question: if Dagon, Hanami, Jogo, and Mahito all attacked current Maki at once, who would come out on top? Because I've scaled the Disaster Cursed Spirits numerous times on the channel before, I will be going into their scaling first, going over all of their individual stats and abilities as succinctly as I possibly can. Dagon, being the weakest curse of the group, seems like a good place to start. I would like to make clear before I get into what I'm about to say that Dagon, even while being the weakest of the group, is still a special grade cursed spirit. He has an immense amount of cursed energy and regeneration capability. To most of the verse, Dagon is a massive threat and should not be underestimated. That being said, in terms of speed, attack potency, durability, and even hacks, Dagon does not really compare to his fellow cursed spirits, and to any super high tier sorcerer, he would simply act as cannon fodder. We see just how lacking Dagon's physical stats are in his own domain, as when he attempts to kill a pre-awakened Maki, she is not only able to react to the attack and block it, but comes out of this encounter mostly unscathed, with her spear cursed tool seemingly being the only casualty in their confrontation. We also see on multiple occasions that when Dagon's domain techniques lose their sure hit effect and actually need to travel, Hanami, one-armed Mahito, and Maki are able to react to these attacks and guard them effectively, demonstrating that outside of a sure hit domain scenario, the speed of Dagon Shikigami are not impressive in the slightest. This, combined with the fact that we see Naobito be able to survive an off-guard punch to the face and a 1-minute swarm of endless Shikigami, demonstrates that even if his techniques were fast, they don't have any real finishing power, once again, in comparison to other top tiers. In terms of durability, Dagon also isn't that impressive, taking significant damage from Naobito's melee attacks, and even losing a chunk of his arm after blocking a playful cloud strike from an injured Maki. Even his hacks relative to his fellow curses are nothing that wild. He has the ability to create a water barrier strong enough to temporarily block the attacks of Hanami, Maki, and Naobito. He can fly, he has a domain expansion, and fish Shikigami that he can launch at his opponent. Not terrible abilities by any means, but certainly the least useful of the aforementioned cursed spirit group. Hanami, in comparison to Dagon, is a decently competent special grade curse. In their skirmishes in Goodwill, Hanami shows off some impressive durability and resilience against the dynamic duo of Yuji and Todo. As stated in the extra material of chapter 52, Hanami is able to survive an onslaught of blows that Jogo would instantly die from, demonstrating that they are a glutton for punishment at the bare minimum. Being able to survive 5 black flashes, 4 of them being consecutive, and a playful cloud strike from Todo is no small feat on their end. On top of this, it is stated by Hanami that each individual strike from base Yuji and Todo actually hurt them, showing that it was consistently taking damage throughout its time in this arc. Durability and resilience aside, Hanami also has some decent physical scaling. They are able to react to and trade blows with Yuji and Todo, 2 characters who are faster than every other student in Goodwill at the time, including Maki. Hanami also showed the ability to adapt to the curse technique Boogie Woogie, and actually is able to counter and damage Yuji and Todo several times throughout the fights. This is pretty impressive just due to how disorienting Boogie Woogie is shown to be whenever it is used. Hanami being able to go back and forth with Yuji and Todo while this technique is activated is definitely not something that should be overlooked when regarding Hanami's adaptability. What also should not be overlooked are the hacks of Hanami, which are honestly some of the most useful and diverse that the Cursed Spirit group have, say with the exclusion of Mahito. In Hanami's arsenal, we see wood manipulation on a massive scale, floating wooden orbs that can shoot attacks powerful enough to pierce Yuji and Todo, cursed energy draining buds, flowers that can lower an opponent's guard temporarily, a flower on their shoulder that converts plant life into cursed energy, and a domain expansion that is implied to have a sure hit technique. Overall, Hanami's arsenal is absolutely insane and might just be one of the most overlooked aspects of the character scaling wise. Moving on to Jogo, we see that he is the glass cannon of the group. He definitely can strike hard and strike fast, but he doesn't really have the durability to match his output. Now, I've scaled Jogo on the channel individually even more than I've scaled the disaster curses as a group, so I'm going to be rather brief on his individual section of the video and go more into detail when I talk about how the fight goes down and the eventual outcome. In terms of speed, there are two real ways to go about it. You could take Kenjaku, Mahito, and Gojo's statement about his relativity to Three-Finger Sukuna to mean that in a fight, those two would be relative in almost every capacity. If you agree with this line of scaling, you would then say that Jogo was relative to Three-Finger Sukuna in speed, strength, and all of those other stats. Now, in the event that this scaling isn't something you agree with, that's completely fine, and in this scenario, you would simply say that he's fast enough to Perception Blitz Hanami and Maki, these characters being fast enough to keep track of Dagon's movement at least visually. This just means that Jogo should be able to Perception Blitz or near Perception Blitz anyone that Dagon has any sort of relativity to combat-wise, and while it's not as impressive as the Three-Finger Sukuna scale, it is much more concrete and less contentious. Now, in terms of AP and hacks, Jogo is pretty simple. Big fire plus big rock equal big damage. He's able to incapacitate the likes of Maki, Hanami, and Naobito with casual flame attacks, and with his maximum technique, it's implied that if it hit, even 15-Finger Sukuna would take damage, although the extent of damage he would take is unknown. Jogo also has a domain expansion, which should exceed all of his other attacks in potency, considering the fact that domain expansions, specifically sure hit ones, are seen as the pinnacle of sorcery, even above the likes of maximum curse techniques, as stated by Kenjaku in chapter 134. Durability wise, we don't have that much for Jogo, even though he gets the second most screen time relative to his group. We know that his durability likely exceeds that of Dagon's, but falls below that of Hanami's by a decent margin. It's hard to get a gauge on what exactly he can handle, as the only meaningful attack that he's been hit with that didn't nearly kill him or tear right through his body is a curse technique reversal red from Gojo, which he survives with rather minor damage. However, considering the fact that Gojo's red doesn't have that many feats of destruction or tearing apart curses, it's kind of hard to gauge exactly where he's at. Other than that, there isn't too much to say about Jogo that I won't be covering in the conclusion of this video. This leaves the head honcho of the disaster curses, and the cursed spirit that is usually the most troublesome to deal with in a fight, Mahito. Scaling Mahito is a pretty simple task, all things considered. Out of all of the disaster cursed spirits, he is the one that gets the most narrative shine and has the most legitimately impressive feats to pull from. For example, he's able to contend with Yuji and Todo in Shibuya while they are functioning at 120% of their potential, something that, as you'll see, most of the cursed spirits on this list would not be able to do. Now, throughout this arc, Mahito shows the ability to not only physically contend with Yuji, but also mentally, as he manipulates and tricks him multiple times, using his curse technique to slowly whittle away at Yuji's mind and body. With reaction and physical speed high enough to keep up with Yuji after multiple Shibuya amps, and the strength to nearly crack his skull open with one attack, Mahito is indeed a force of nature even in comparison to his allies. Much like Hanami, Mahito has an insane amount of durability and resilience, even when not in his true form. Before evolving and gaining his ridiculous amount of durability, he takes dozens of attacks from Yuji in his final fight, all without dying, and survives not one, but 2 black flashes from his natural enemy, completely unguarded, all without dying or even really coming that close. Something that a majority of the cursed spirits and really a majority of the verse can't say applies to them. Now, while Mahito's physical speed, strength, and durability are all very, very impressive, what truly makes him someone that most characters would not want to go up against is his technique, Idle Transfiguration, one of the most versatile and broken abilities in the entire verse. With Idle Transfiguration, Mahito is immune to the attacks of those who can't perceive the shape of the soul and attack it. On top of this, Mahito is able to bypass someone's durability with a touch and attack their very soul, meaning that even the toughest characters in the verse can fall victim to his attacks if they are not careful and if they do not have some sort of soul protection. With his manipulation of souls also comes the transfigured humans that he keeps around as projectiles, extra enemies, and even decoys to distract whoever has the displeasure of going up against him. And when Mahito is really trying to put you down, when he's really trying to put you in the dirt, he can combine the transfigured humans to make attack specialists powerful enough to injure Todo and send them flying, although due to their attack speciality, their durability is nothing to write home about. Finally, if you can really push Mahito into a corner, he has his domain expansion, which can be launched and closed in 0.2 seconds if necessary. And he has his true form, which is durable enough to completely tank attacks from Yuji and powerful enough to tear him to pieces even while injured. In fact, in the chapter 132 extra material, it stated that if Yuji did not land a Black Flash on Mahito right before he transformed, he would have been torn to shreds, implying that Mahito not only gets a strength and durability buff, but a speed one as well. With all of these abilities being at his disposal and the help of 3 other high-level special grades on his side, can he, Jogo, Hanami, and Dagon possibly lose to the likes of Maki? When it comes to scaling Maki now, there is an abundance of information, feats, statements, and lore to pull from. One quick thing before I jump into it I'd like to make known is that Maki and Toji as of chapter 199 are not just physical equals, but equal combatants, period. No more Maki is as physically strong but would lose due to experience, no more she has the same stats but not the same skill, and certainly no more arguments that revolve around her being close to Toji but not quite. At the end of chapter 198, the narrator says, quote, "A demonic fighter equal to Toji Zenin was realized." When mentioned in reference to Maki, this statement simply leaves no room for debate or discussion. As fighters, these two are equal. Now, with that being said, the amount of physical scaling Maki has at her disposal is actually ridiculous and is doubled from what she previously had. For starters, it is stated in chapter 150 that the Zenin clan remains intact only because it was Toji's whim. What this means is that at any point during his lifetime, Toji could have destroyed the Zenin clan just like Maki and lived to tell the tale. This is impressive, not only because it displays a certain level of skill and awareness on his part, but because when he was alive, Naobito was a part of the Zenin clan. As you may be aware, Naobito was a character that even as a drunk old man, was the fastest sorcerer aside from Gojo. He was so fast, in fact, that he was able to perception blitz the likes of Hanami, Maki, and Dagon consistently, being so fast that Dagon did not even have time to activate his own techniques. On top of this, Dagon states in chapter 107 that Naobito is probably faster than Jogo, a character who is one of the faster disaster curse spirits. I've seen a lot of contention surrounding Dagon's statement considering that the word probably is used. However, I think that people are either being disingenuous with their interpretation of this argument or flat out wrong when they're looking at this statement. What Dagon is saying here is that it is simply more likely that Naobito is faster than Jogo than it is that he isn't faster, meaning that in Dagon's mind, there's a over 50% chance that in terms of speed, Naobito is superior to Jogo when using projection sorcery. And in versus battles debates like this, and really in any power scaling scenario, when confronted with 2 possible options or conditions, it makes sense to go with the side that is seemingly more likely. That being the side of Naobito being faster in this instance. You could even chalk up Dagon's hesitant to place Naobito soundly over Jogo due to him just favoring his fellow curse spirits, as we know that is in his character. Now, if you want to say that 2-arm Naobito likely isn't that much faster, which is why Dagon only says it's probable, that's completely fine, but the most logical conclusion would still side with Naobito being greater than Jogo speed-wise. As you might be able to understand now, Toji, and therefore Maki, being fast enough to deal with someone like Naobito along with an entire clan filled with Jujutsu sorcerers is extremely impressive because of the speed required to do so. On top of scaling above Naobito via Toji, Maki also scales vastly above characters like Yuji in terms of speed, Yuji being a character fast enough to consistently react to the likes of Mahito and Hanami in his past fights. The reason Maki scales above Yuji speed-wise is also relatively simple. Naoya, while holding back, is fast enough to completely outspeed Yuji to the point of perception blitzing him and Choso. I've heard arguments that say Yuji is only being perception blitzed because he's caught off guard, but this just makes no sense, as before Naoya even makes his move, he declares that he's going to break Yuji's legs and kill Megami. 2 things that would instantly put Yuji's guard up. And in the panel that Yuji gets perception blitzed in, he is stanced up, clearly ready to throw hands. Now, we know that Naoya was holding back when he performed this feat because he basically says as much in chapter 139, where he says that he can up his speed. This boast is also substantiated by the fact that Naoya shows he can shift into higher gears both in his fight with Choso and later in his fight with Maki. This means that Maki can see, react to, and fight characters fast enough to blitz Yuji, even before she gets her next stamp later in the Cooling Games. When you take that into account, her speed actually gets kinda insane. You see, Curse Spirit Naoya when in his second form is fast enough to perception blitz Maki when he runs away to charge up speed. Maki cannot deal with this level of speed properly until she realizes what she's not been seeing and adjusts later in the fight. The amp that she gets from this realization is so potent that it takes her from being at the mercy of Naoya's ridiculous speed to being frustratingly faster than him. So much so that Naoya literally cries out in rage at the fact that even after running off to charge up, he cannot hit her. Now, for all of those who don't understand the significance of this, let me explain. At the base of this, you have Yuji and Mahito. Two characters that at the base of all of this are relative to each other. They can react to, perceive, and hit each other consistently, and neither character is blitzing the other under normal circumstances. A tier above this, you have Naoya and Maki, characters who should be able to perception blitz Yuji. Maki is relative to this Naoya because she can react to and perceive Naoya's movements and counter them with her own. A tier above that, you have Curse Spirit Naoya, a character who can perception blitz Maki, a character who, just to remind you, could keep up with Naoya in his first life. Now, a tier above that, you have Maki after her second awakening, at this point being so fast that even Naoya cannot touch her. What this means is that Maki currently is significantly faster than a character who can perception blitz, a character who can perception blitz Yuji. Yuji being someone, mind you, who is about as fast as Mahito. The levels of speed that Maki can achieve at this point are absolutely ridiculous. If that wasn't enough, Maki and Toji's heightened senses allow for them to feel minor movements and shifts in the air in order to predict the following attacks of their opponents, functioning as some kind of precognition, granting them the ability to seem even faster than they actually are, as shown in chapter 197, where Maki literally dodges a full charge from Naoya while she's in the air. Overall, it's safe to say that Maki recently became one of the fastest known characters in the series. Just like with speed, Maki's AP and durability stats are absolutely ridiculous, eclipsing a majority of the Jujutsu Kaisen universe. We know that at this point in the series, she is significantly stronger than she was in Shibuya. This is shown pretty blatantly in chapter 110 with Toji's appearance in Dagon's domain. He sorta casually just rips Playful Cloud out of Maki's hand and proceeds to beat down Dagon with the Curse Tool extremely quickly. This is impressive, not only because Toji is able to rip through the Shikigami and physical body of a high-level special grade, but because being markedly stronger than pre-awakened Maki means that with the proper Curse Tool, Toji should be able to rip through the body of characters with insane durability like Hanami. This is just due to the fact that Goodwill Maki shows the ability to take a chunk of Hanami's arm with Playful Cloud, as shown in chapter 48. With regards to Maki's durability, we know that this has to scale at least relative to her physical output due to her body not crumbling and cracking under the force of her own attacks. You know, Newton's third law and all that. Now on top of this, we know that she scales to Toji, a character who was able to survive an off-guard red from Gojo with only minor bleeding from his head. Generally speaking, there is much less to go into for Maki's strength scaling than there is her speed scaling, and while we are very, very close to taking a look at the outcome of this battle and how I imagine it plays out, we need to take a look at Maki's hacks and equipment first. Before Maki's recent bout with Naoya, I wouldn't have even bothered discussing Maki's hacks and equipment in depth, simply because the amount of ability she had and even the number of powerful curse tools she owned was limited, to say the least. However, after the conclusion of her fight with Naoya, it is safe to say that there is quite a bit to talk about. For starters, we now know that Maki has a surprisingly high level healing factor, being confident that she can recover from very serious internal injuries in just 5 minutes. The coughing up blood is one of the big signs that the damage Naoya dealt to her was indeed internal, so the fact that she's extremely confident in her ability to recover from an injury such as this after such a short period speaks volumes. It is by no means as potent of a healing ability as, say, Yuta, Hikari's, or even Sukuna's, but it's certainly useful and not an ability that is unwanted. In conjunction with her healing factor, Maki seems to have a superhuman ability to fight through damage that in most instances would be fatal. You may think that in a battle manga, sustaining injuries and fighting through them is common, and while you would be correct, Certain characters in Jujutsu Kaisen seem to have a heightened ability to deal with pain and damage, notably better than others. Yuji is a prime example of this, as it's stated in chapter 61 that pain alone can't and won't stop him. Maki seems to take this a step further, however, as we see that during the events of the Zenin massacre, she is fighting an entire clan, all while bleeding out from the wounds Ogi gave her before she transforms. Just to remind you, 2 chapters before she starts tearing through the entire Zenin clan, Maki had just been cut so deeply that we, the audience, can literally see her stomach start to fall out before getting slashed over her already injured eye. This is not a normal amount of damage to even survive, much less fight through at such a high level. This is also shown, albeit to a lesser degree, when she fights Naoya the second time. After sustaining internal injuries from his blitz, she re-enters the fight before the 5-minute healing time is up, and Kama notes that she is clearly still suffering from her previous injuries, as she did not give her body enough time to heal. This unnaturally high resilience combined with a solid healing factor make for an extremely useful and applicable combat utility. If being almost unkillable wasn't enough, Maki's perception abilities have also become otherworldly, almost entering the realm of the Six Eyes in terms of insightfulness. We've known that completed heavenly restriction bodies allow for an insane level of sensory ability since Yuki mentioned it all the way back in chapter 77, but the level of usefulness and potency had never been something we had been privy to. By feeling the minute temperature, pressure, and atmospheric differences, Maki is able to predict Naoya's movements while he's moving at top speed and generally have awareness of everything around her. Now, while this enhancement alone would be justification for an entire power-up, Gege took it one step further, showing us that Maki can literally see the shape of the soul in both organic and inorganic matter with her new body. This is an ability that surpasses 99% of the Versus capabilities and instantly makes her a big threat when fighting a certain patched face curse. She becomes an even bigger issue when she has Mai in her hands, a cursed tool that is the spitting image of Soul Splitter, a weapon that bypasses durability and directly cuts the soul when it is in the hands of someone who can perceive and be aware of souls themselves. This essentially means that no matter how tough you are, if Maki hits you with this sword, you are going to take damage. And not just any old damage, soul damage. The kind of damage so potent that when used in the hands of other soul manipulators, it leads to near instant death. To make matters worse, for her opponent, due to Maki having 0 cursed energy, she is immune to all domain expansions that don't specifically target inanimate objects. So not only can she not be trapped within a domain without her say-so, but she is also immune to these sure hit techniques that exist inside of it, even if she does decide to enter of her own volition. So for all of those who may have gotten lost on the sheer amount of abilities listed, let me quickly recap for you. Maki has a healing factor, inhuman resilience, precognition due to her sensory abilities, the ability to see and cut souls, and immunity to all domain expansions that don't include inanimate objects specifically, which for all intents and purposes is all domains except for Sukuna's. At this point, I think it's safe to say that Maki is a real problem. However, her opponents, even individually, are real problems too, and in this scenario, there are 4 of them, all teaming up to take her down. Would her abilities be enough, or would the combined efforts of these cursed spirits be too much for even this newly awakened Maki to handle? Let's find out. Maki versus the Disaster Cursed Spirits is a fight that has a very one-sided outcome for several reasons. The first is that Maki is completely immune to the trump cards of all of her opponents. Whether it be Dagon, Hanami, Jogo, or even Mahito, none of their domains would be more than a waste of time and a waste of cursed energy. This eliminates one of the biggest Disaster Cursed Spirits win cons in a versus matchup like this. However, you may be thinking, they could always just jump Maki and overwhelm her with sheer numbers and aggression, right? But not so much. You see, Maki is so much faster than all of the Disaster Cursed Spirits that realistically, they aren't even going to be able to line up good combination attacks. When compared to the likes of Mahito, Dagon, and Hanami, she's so much faster that she would essentially do to them what Jogo did to her in Shibuya. Before they would even react, she would appear in front of them, swipe her sword a couple of times, and it would just be over. Hanami is relative to like a Goodwill, Yuji, and Todo. Maki is several layers of speed above that, and she's also several layers of speed above her old self. The durability of these characters wouldn't even be a factor considering Mai's curse technique in sword form, and even Mahito would be susceptible to the damage that she is dealing. In fact, she would be more of a natural predator to him rather than just a natural born enemy like Yuji and Nobara. Even if Mahito's soul manipulation makes it possible for him to survive the first couple of strikes, Maki would have no issue slicing, ripping, and tearing through him as much as necessary to finish the job. Hanami and Dagon are obviously inferior to Mahito in both speed and resilience in this instance, so they would go down even easier than he would. This would just leave Jogo, who is only really being discussed separately because his speed is a bit more contentious than the others. If you think that Jogo scales relative to Three Finger Sakuda and Toji scales about that level of speed based off of Megami's statement in chapter 113, these two characters would be relative in speed, making it a much more pitched battle. However, there are definitely some flaws in having these two characters be relative. For one, even if Jogo does scale to Three Finger Sukuna in a fight and would win, that doesn't mean his speed has to be equal or even all that close to this version of Sukuna's. If he is able to get off an attack with a massive AoE that would kill him, then that would fulfill the terms of being relative to him. But even the matter of Jogo being relative to Three Finger Sukuna is contentious. For the Toji / Three Finger Sukuna scale, that gets iffy because Megami doesn't really see Toji or Sukuna when he fights him, as both characters' perception blitz him really badly. This makes him a somewhat unreliable narrator that doesn't have a great handle on either character's speed. If this is the case, we can't determine that Toji and by proxy Maki are limited to this level of speed. A much more consistent way to scale these two characters is by using Naobito as a bit of a measuring stick. I already went in depth on why Dagon's comparison between Jogo and Naobito lends credence to the idea that Naobito is indeed faster, which is further implicated by the fact that even when nerfed, he could avoid and catch Jogo off guard with his speed temporarily. Toji and Maki would have to at least be relative in speed to Naobito because of their ability to destroy the clan at any time they please. In order to do this, they would have to be able to see and hit him just like Maki was able to do versus Naoya. This lineup scaling would place Maki over Jogo in speed, and with her ability to one-shot him with her cursed tool, Maki would definitely be able to get her revenge against the fire-based cursed spirit. Overall, when you take into account the speed difference, her immunity to domains, the potency of her cursed tool, and general fighting ability, Maki would make quick work of the cursed spirits that represent human fears. If you want to see all of the other Jujutsu Kaisen versus battles on the channel, including Yuta versus the Disaster Cursed Spirits, click here.